All right, well, we are in the book of 1 Kings this morning. I was not able to be here Thursday night, and Mark subbed for the class, and he told me that y'all got through chapter 1. Are there any things that were left hanging, or final questions, or we're going to move straight into chapter 2? Chapter 1's a pretty long chapter, so we got through it. That's good. 1 Kings chapter 2 is where we are this morning. And just to kind of re-summarize what happened in chapter 1, David had reached old age, and they had brought in a concubine, Abishag, who didn't really know David. What had happened while David was in his old age and frailty, David did not know what was going on with his son, Adonijah. Adonijah decided he would be king, and he curried support from Joab and from Abiathar the priest and from several other key players. And Adonijah tried to make himself king, but he excluded the wrong people. He excluded Zadok, he excluded Benaiah, he excluded Nathan, and most interestingly, he excluded Solomon. He invited all of the other king's sons to his celebration, but he excluded Solomon, which is kind of interesting. Did he know what was supposed to happen? I think so. Well, what happens, of course, is Nathan and Bathsheba, they go into David and they tell David, your son, Adonijah, is trying to take the throne and you don't even know about it, and he's already hatched this conspiracy. And, as soon as you're gone and he's in power, what's going to happen to Solomon? What's going to happen to Bathsheba? We'll be regarded as offenders. We'll have to fear for our lives. Well, King David, of course, rises from his sickly position in the bed and begins giving more orders, his last orders as kings, in order to fulfill the promise that he swore, to seat Solomon on the throne. Over and over again, there's a key phrase repeated in this chapter, to seat somebody on the throne of David. And, of course, what happens is the chapter's central question is, who's going to sit on the throne? And the answer to that is Solomon. And so they make Solomon king, they anoint him, they put him on the king's mule, they have him ride out, and then all the people start to celebrate, and they shake the earth and shake up Adonijah's party in the process. What happens in 1 Kings chapter, at the end of 1 Kings chapter 1 is a messenger comes in and tells them, Solomon's become king, and you don't know it, Adonijah. Now we have a flip. The situation has been flipped around. It's been reversed. David didn't know Adonijah was making himself king, but David turns the tables. Now Adonijah doesn't know that Solomon has become king. And Adonijah fears for his life now. And he runs to the altar and he takes hold of the horns of the altar as a place of refuge. And he says, don't kill me. I want to live. I want to live. And Solomon says, okay, well, if you are a worthy man, you will live. But if wickedness is found in him, you will die. That brings us to the beginning of chapter 2, which is, we're continuing this succession narrative. Chapter 2. And can I go ahead and get a volunteer to read the first 9 verses of 1 Kings chapter 2?
David's time to die drew near. He charged Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, and walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and where you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning you, saying, if your sons are careful of their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now you also know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, what he did to the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner the son of Ner and Amasa the son of Sheba, whom he killed, whom he also shed the blood of war. He put the blood of war on his belt about his waist and on his feet. So act according to your wisdom, not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. Show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite. Let them be among those who eat at your table. They assisted me in the life of Absalom, your brother. Behold, there is with you Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite of Bahurim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I was in the hand. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, will bring your gray hair down to Sheol with black.
All right. All right, so this is David's final recorded words in the Samuel King storyline. And he gives Solomon some instructions for how the kingdom can be established. I want to note in passing that a key phrase or key term in this chapter is the establishment of the kingdom. I want to look at some verses to kind of establish this point. In verse 12, when David dies, it says, Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. This is kind of right at the beginning of the chapter. And towards the end of the chapter, the last thing it says in verse 46 is, thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. There's a few other places where it's mentioned as well. Verse 24, the Lord, as the Lord lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah will be put to death today. Verse 45, King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. That word for established is actually also a key term in the promise to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7. When the Lord told David that I will establish your throne, I will establish your house, I will establish your son after you, and I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. And so that word appears quite a bit in 2 Samuel 7 as well. This chapter, you might then rightly say, is about the establishment of the kingdom, of Solomon's kingdom in particular. Let's ask ourselves a question. What two things are necessary, according to David, if Solomon's going to establish his kingdom? What are the two things that need to happen in these verses we just read? Follow the Lord, specifically how? Keeping His commandments. Okay. All right, so we have this... I'm going to write obey the laws because that's shorter and easier to write than keeping the commandments. But yeah, it's the same thing there. Okay, and what's the other thing David tells him he needs to do? Yes, Jen? Okay, so some people have to die. Kill, and I'm just going to write enemies. The people who are hostile to the establishment of Solomon's kingdom. All right, those are the two things David tells Solomon needs to happen if his kingdom is going to be established. Obey the laws of the Lord and kill the enemies. Now, now some people are going to hit the brakes here and say, well, wait a second, doesn't the law say not to kill people?
Thou shalt not commit murder.
Thou shalt not commit murder. Well, okay, what's the distinction?
Murder is unlawful killing.
Unlawful killing. Why?
Murder is like when altercation on the road and get out and get into a fight and somebody kills them.
Okay, all right. That's true, he was. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood must be shed. That's one thing that people sometimes get hung up on, the command, do not murder. It can't apply to capital punishment, for instance, because, the law also specified a death penalty for the murderer. That puts the executioner of Israel in kind of a catch-22. I can't execute this guy unless, then they have to execute me in the process. Well, obviously that's not what's meant by the commandment. But what's going on here, and there's considerable debate about this issue actually. Is Solomon and David, are they acting wickedly and having all this list of people killed? Or is this the right thing to do, the wise thing to do, the thing they're supposed to do? I believe that's question 3 in the workbook. What did y'all put for that? I'm just curious to know what people think. Huh? You left it blank because you didn't know. Ooh, interesting. Okay.
Some things that the law prescribes.
Okay.
So each of these people killed for the right reason. David couldn't bring himself to kill Joab, in my opinion, because of all of the things Joab had done for him. Joab had done some significantly good things for David. Mm-hmm. And it's probable that David just said, okay, punishment is going to be here, but not by my hand. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not the right one to do it. Sometimes we're not the right one to execute. Sometimes that belongs to somebody else. Be careful about that.
Okay.
And then Shimei cursed him, but if David had killed him, would that have been justice, or would it have been sin? Okay? There's a problem. David might have realized that he was doing it more out of personal revenge than out of justice. So he leaves Solomon justice.
Okay. I saw Keith's hand.
The ad was marked that Israel being governed.
Mm-hmm.
So the leader or the king or the potentate had the authority based on the law of Moses to execute capital punishment. These two guys all were guilty of violating the law.
All right. Jen, you have something? He cursed David, which would have been forbidden and prohibited under the law. Hang on. Let me get the scripture reference. It's in here. This file is not complete. Okay. Well, in Exodus chapter 22, I think it is, it says, "You shall not curse God nor curse a ruler of your people." The penalty elsewhere in the law for blaspheming God was death. It seems to subsequently follow that cursing the Lord's anointed also results in death. Exodus 20. I'm going to remember where it is eventually, but you know what? This did not sync to the network. So I had, there's a chunk of my notes that are missing today for some reason. Go figure. It's the part where, Exodus 22:28. Thank you. I was going to have to dig around in that mess of laws. Yes. No, you're right. Yes. You shall not curse God nor curse a ruler of your people. There's quite a... They ask, as a side note, is it appropriate to, curse the government if you don't agree with stuff they're doing? Absolutely not. Romans chapter 13, 1 Peter chapter 2, fear God, honor the king. Those two things go hand in hand. Whoever despises authority is despising the God who gave authority in the first place. It doesn't mean you have to like what they're doing or agree with what they're doing, but you must have respect. And that's the key to this whole thing. Now what Shimei is doing here is clearly a violation of that principle. Now, the way Shimei is killed is a little different than the way the others are killed, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the accusation that's sometimes leveled against David is that he's... and I actually agree with what you all have said so far, that the king is acting wisely. An accusation is sometimes made against David that he's having a selective memory. He rewards Barzillai, but he doesn't, for his loyalty, but he ignores Joab's so-called loyalty, which... you have to have a much more positive view of Joab than we've taken in this class in order to even get there. And then there's the other side of this, which is saying, that David technically swore an oath to Shimei. He shall not die. He promised not to kill him. So, can't be... And you'll remember, back in 2 Samuel chapter 19, 2 Samuel chapter 19, in verse 23, the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." Thus the king swore to him. The king swears an oath. Now here, David doesn't have Shimei killed. He tells Solomon, make sure you deal with him wisely. You're a wise man. You know how to handle this. And of course, how does Solomon get Shimei? Well, he gets him on the technicality of an oath.
Actually, the way he got Adonijah.
A violation of an oath that he will...
Well, he told Adonijah, "You're a worthy man, you shall live." Die.
Right.
Then Adonijah comes back and says, "I want your father's concubine for my wife." Well, that was a power play.
There's some other things to think about too, and we're going to talk about Adonijah in a minute. Because Adonijah is not mentioned in the list that David gives, actually. Adonijah is the one who kind of gets the ball rolling on some of the other stuff. When we look at these two things being necessary for the establishment of the kingdom, obedience of laws, destruction of enemies, this word for establish is matched by another word throughout the text, some form of the word death. Either the verbal form, which means to put to death, or the noun form, which is just death. It's all over this chapter. In order for the kingdom to be established, people are going to die. Does that sound like anything that we would know from a New Testament perspective? People are going to die. 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 People are How so? Jesus. In order for Jesus' kingdom to be established, people have got to die. Now, Jesus himself dies to establish the kingdom. Anybody else got to die before his rule can be firmly established in this world? We have to die to sin? Okay, all right, good. What if we refuse to die to sin? What's going to happen? All right, what happens if we choose not to die to sin? You're going to die another way, yeah. So death is a result of the establishment of the kingdom. It's integrally connected to it. The enemies of the kingdom wind up being destroyed. You know, the whole book of Revelation describes this, kind of the final consummation of the kingdom. And what happens to those who are not part of it? Their part will be in the lake of fire, burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. That's an idea, we don't like to think about that, but that's there. The idea that some people are going to get eternal life and some people are going to get eternal death. That the establishment of the kingdom comes with death. And so, to think about that, that's the principle being taught in this chapter. The elimination of enemies is necessary to establish the kingdom. Is it our job to eliminate the enemies? No. It's the king's job to do that. Can we really castigate Solomon if Adonijah was stupid and Shimei careless? I read one commentator that said that, and there's some truth to that. David sees no conflict between these two things, and we shouldn't either. Jesus had to die to set up his own kingdom, and his kingdom results in the death of his enemies. Those who would defy the Lord's Christ, those who would defy the Lord's anointed and curse the Lord's anointed and try to be king in place of the Lord's anointed, and try to wrongly kill people in the name of the Lord's anointed, all those people will not be part of the new kingdom that is described here. That's true of Solomon. That's true of Jesus as well. Now we look at Joab. More specifically, I want to zero in on Joab for a minute. Joab is put to death. Why? What are the reasons that David gives for Joab's execution? Joab allied with Adonijah. That's true, Joab did ally with Adonijah. But is that the reason that David gives as to why he should be executed? Killed two men. Who were they? Abner and Amasa. The two guys who were on the opposite end of a conflict in the Civil War. Abner was the commander of Saul's army and Ishbosheth's army. Amasa was the commander of Absalom's army. Joab killed them both after they defected. Don, you have something? More righteous than Joab. Abner don't seem like that righteous of a fellow either. That's what's really interesting about that. Okay, anybody notice a name conspicuously absent from the list of Joab's kills? Well, Joab didn't kill Saul. Yeah, Joab didn't kill Saul, but he did kill Absalom. And, Uriah, David can't really blame that on Joab. He has to blame himself for that one. But Absalom is missing from that, even though Joab had him killed. Kind of interesting. Did David forgive him for that? Did David realize its necessity, that Absalom had to die? But the real problem with Joab is he shed the blood of war in the time of peace. He decorated his belt with the blood of war. That can't be allowed to stand. Innocent blood was shed. That blood will be avenged. And this is the fulfillment of Genesis 9:6. Interesting. Now some people again raise the question, what would have happened if Joab had shown allegiance to Solomon instead of Adonijah? Well, what would have happened? Would he have still been executed? Probably. Why do we... Okay, because of killing those guys. Let me ask you another question. Shimei, in chapter 1, whenever people are taking sides with Adonijah and Solomon, which side does Shimei fall on? Anybody remember? back and look at chapter 1. It's very interesting. Look at the list of people that Adonijah does not invite to his party in chapter 1 and verse 8. Shimei was not invited to Adonijah's celebration. So whose side is Shimei on in the conflict between Solomon and Adonijah? Nobody seems to like him, right? That's possible, certainly. But he didn't side with Adonijah. He wasn't liked by Adonijah. Who is Shimei, by the way? What is his role in this story? Who is he associated with? Who is he loyal to? Saul. Yes, he's loyal to the house of Saul. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. This man, in fact, we might say he's the last real representative of the house of Saul that exists in this whole story. But, he's not a friend to Adonijah, and yet what happens is he eventually winds up not being a friend to Solomon either. Solomon doesn't consider him a friend and has him executed. So even if Joab hadn't been on Adonijah's coup, he probably would have been executed too as well. Again, we can make an analogy from one to the other. He says to show kindness to Barzillai's sons. We know about Barzillai from 2 Samuel chapter 19. His descendants will eat at Solomon's table. That's the center of power in the kingdom. We'll see later. Shimei is to be put to death for his crimes. But David reminds Solomon, he says, I swore an oath to him, so we can't, you have to act wisely about this too. You do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man and you will know what you ought to do to him. And then verses 10 through 12, we have David's death record. David slept with his fathers, was buried in the city of David. The days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. All right. David's death notice is similar to other kings in the book. It's kind of interesting. In 1 Kings 1:31, Bathsheba told David, "O king, live forever." Very shortly after that, he dies. David wrote several psalms talking about how the Lord would give life to his king. So he asked of you life, and you gave it to him, length of days, forever and ever. Psalm 20 in verse 7. Psalm 16 in verse 12. You will not abandon my soul into Sheol, nor allow your Holy One to undergo decay. Guess what? David died. In spite of all those statements of trust, in spite of all those promises of God. Well, there's a hint there that there must be a greater life than this. Because David was not speaking of himself, his tomb remains to us till this day. He looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of the Christ. Acts chapter 2 in verse 29 talks about that. All right. Any questions down to verse 12? All right, let's go ahead with Adonijah's execution, verses 13 through 27. Who wants to read that section? All right. So Adonijah comes to the king with this request. Well, he doesn't go to the king directly. He goes to the king through Bathsheba. Similar to how Nathan goes to David through Bathsheba in chapter 1. All right, and what's the deal with Adonijah's request? What is significant about this? Abishag was the, you want to call her the nurse. There's considerable debate about what Abishag's role actually is, or rather what Abishag's role is actually intended to be, I should say. The text is pretty clear in 1 Kings chapter 1, in verse 4. The king did not cohabit with her. Literally, the king did not know her. So no sex actually takes place, the text is saying. That doesn't mean that wasn't the intention. And in fact, why does she have to be a young woman? Think about that for a minute. Why does that matter? Why couldn't one of his wives do this? We got to get somebody else in on this situation. I don't know. I don't think it portrays David in a very favorable light what they do here. But that said, because Abishag is in that position, why would it have been such a big deal for Adonijah to try to ask for her as a wife? Yeah, now she's been with David, she has to be with the king. There are several ways you can become king in the ancient world. One of them is to be the son of a king. Your father dies, you get to be on the throne, like Solomon did just now. One way you can become king in Israel is by killing the previous king and making yourself king forcibly. Quite a few people do that in the Bible. Baasha does that to Jeroboam's son Nadab, and on we can go with that. One way that you can become king is you could marry the king's daughter, become the king's son-in-law, and then you would have a legal claim to the throne. David technically does that. He marries Michal, Saul's daughter, and that gives him a claim on the throne of Israel, among other things. The main thing that gives him a claim on the throne of Israel is that the Lord said so. But one way that's sometimes explored is taking the wife or concubine of a previous king. How does Absalom secure power whenever he takes the throne from David? He goes into 10 of David's concubines. Publicly, in the sight of all Israel. Yes. And so that everybody knows that that's what's going on. And that's Absalom's way of saying, I have become king. Whenever a king succeeded another king, he would inherit the harem of the previous king. There's a couple of other places where this comes up. 2 Samuel chapter 3, Abner, it says, made himself strong in the house of Saul. And Ishbosheth accuses him of trying to take Ritzpah, his father's concubine. Now the text is ambiguous as to whether Abner was guilty, outside of the expression he was making himself strong in the house of Saul. But that would have been considered a power play. That would have been considered a grab at the throne. It's a big no-no in the ancient world unless you want to be king, moving in on the king's previous concubines. So when Adonijah says, I want to marry Abishag, what's that look like? It looks like he still wants to be king. Jenna?
Would that whole thing be harem or
No, but,
why would Solomon permit that even if it's not a power?
well, technically she didn't cohabit with Solomon. And it's clear that these kings, it's clear that David and Solomon are kind of bending the rules a little bit on the Bible's sexual ethics a little bit. You have the polygamy thing going on, which is never technically mentioned in the law. But you do have the statements about kings not multiplying wives for themselves in 2 Deuteronomy chapter 17. And you also have to reckon with the fact that Solomon takes a lot of wives that he shouldn't be. So, exactly why biblical characters act the way they do, they're not always concerned with the legality of their actions. Don, you have something? Yeah. And you know what? I mean, that right there, even if Adonijah was purely innocent, I doubt he was, but even if he was, this is a really bad move on his part. He's not very bright. Even if, regardless of what his intentions are, he doesn't get an A+ for intelligence in this story. Because what happens is it results in his death. Solomon interprets it as a power play and says, nope, you're going to die. And not only are you going to die, I'm going to get rid of your two supporters, Abiathar and Joab, as well. Which we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, in light of all of that, he approaches Bathsheba first. Why do you think Bathsheba is so agreeable to bring this request to the king? Ah, yeah. Yes, Jen.
I mean, kind of phrases it like, fine, but I didn't hear
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of questions about Bathsheba's motives here. Some people think she's gullible and just doesn't understand how politics work. Doubtful. Or, she more likely wants to see Adonijah killed. Now, some people take it even further than that and say that she's also trying to engineer Joab's death because, in revenge for Uriah. I don't know. Some people say that she's trying to get Abishag out of the picture because she doesn't like her. I don't know. Again, that's one of those things that people are kind of reading between the lines on.
You look at his response.
You look at his response.
Sarcastic about it. You said, well, that's what
Well, you'll notice also the way she goes to Solomon and phrases his request. Look what she omits. Look at that, what she omits. Adonijah's whole request is prefaced by this, okay, I wanted to be king, but I didn't get it. Can I have a consolation prize? Now she leaves that part out. She just says, Adonijah wants Abishag. Doesn't explain why he wants Abishag. Doesn't try to even, hint at any purity of his motives on his part. He wants Abishag. And Solomon goes, well, he's not going to keep his head for this. Don't refuse him. I know, she even says that. Oh, don't refuse him. She's echoing his words there when she says that. But yeah.
And that was, you have to understand, when they bartered and they asked requests, they didn't phrase it like we would in the Western world.
No.
Way of phrasing things. But I also think there's another thing, possibility. Adonijah was stupid enough to ask her for it. Ask for it,
See how that happens, right?
and she may have known what the outcome was going to be, but her duty was to bring this on to Solomon.
That's possible. Yeah.
She may have looked at it that way.
Yeah.
relevant to the fact that Adonijah there when everybody starts
Well, the point that sometimes gets made, and I was reading an article about this a few weeks ago, is that what the text goes out of its way to tell us that when Bathsheba went in to King David to talk to him about Solomon, Abishag was there. Now, why mention that? Is the question that gets raised. And the point that then goes on into this elaborate story about how Abishag is taking the place that Bathsheba once did. There's this feminine jealousy that takes place, and so Bathsheba decides to X her out of the picture because after this move of Adonijah, Abishag's not going anywhere. She's not going to be married to anybody. She'll probably spend the rest of her life celibate at this rate. Now again, there's a lot of speculation that goes into that theory. You have to read between the lines quite a bit to get there. I don't think Bathsheba is doing this because she's gullible, though. What's going on, it's clear that it seems clear to me that this reaction from Solomon is expected. And so what happens is Solomon decides to interpret Adonijah's request as a claim on the kingdom. He does something that David never did nor recommended. He takes action against one of the family and has him executed. And so therein is what happens is Adonijah is removed from any claim to the throne. God is emphatically described in verse 24 as the one who establishes the kingdom. God is the one that put me here. Adonijah's sure not going to take me out of here. Benaiah becomes Adonijah's executioner. And then, of course, Adonijah's death becomes a setting for two other removals. First, there's Abiathar the priest, which we read in verses 26 and 27. Now, Abiathar doesn't die. Why doesn't Abiathar die? Because he was a priest. Because he carried the ark. Because he was afflicted with everything with which David was afflicted. Which again, Joab was too, but he didn't get to carry the ark, so that was special, I guess. Yeah. That's true. Solomon is different from Saul in this respect. When Saul suspected the priest of aiding his adversary, he had all the priests killed. And Abiathar was the only one that escaped. But here, Solomon spares Abiathar, but removes him from being a priest. He is no longer allowed to be a priest to the Lord. Can the king do this? I don't know. But I will say this, that this has actually been a long time coming, because what does the text say the reason for this really is? Verse 27. Now, what is the reason for Abiathar's dismissal? We've got to go all the way back to Eli's house. When the Lord made a promise to Eli's house, he said that I'm going to break your house, there will be no more priests in it, and instead you'll be begging your replacement for a job so that you can get a piece of silver or a piece of bread. Now, we've got to understand, of course, the sequence of events. Eli had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Hophni and Phinehas both died. In 1 Samuel chapter 14, is it 14? Excuse me, it's 1 Samuel. Okay, I lost my scripture references again. This is what happens when you don't write this stuff down. All right, well, what happens is Phinehas has a son named Ahijah. And Ahijah... It's in 1 Samuel 13 and 14. Anyhow, what happens is, there's a chain of events that go down. You have Ahijah, you have Ahimelech, you have Abiathar. Now, Abiathar is the great-grandson of Eli. He is the last of the house of Eli to serve in the priesthood. He is removed, and he is replaced by Zadok. Now, Zadok is a descendant of Aaron, Eleazar, and Phinehas. And so he had the rightful claim on the high priesthood all along, according to Numbers 25. But Zadok becomes the new priesthood. It's interesting, if you read some of the ancient writings that were circulating in the time of Jesus, there were some groups that were actually looking for two messiahs. They were looking for a Messiah who was a descendant of David to be their king, and they were looking for another Messiah who was a descendant of Zadok to be their priest. Zadok features quite prominently as a character in the Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, and in terms of what their expectations are. Now, what do we do with that? I don't know. But it is interesting that idea was circulating in the time of Jesus. Now, of course, the New Testament affirms that there's really one king who is also our priest, and it is subsumed in Jesus Christ, who fulfills all of those anointed offices at once. But I mentioned that just for just as a point of interest. Okay, we're out of time, so we don't get to talk about how Joab was executed. But we'll talk about Joab and Shimei next time, and hopefully get into chapter 3. The opening chapters of Kings are fairly long. Some of the subsequent chapters are a little shorter, and they contain a lot of lists, so they should go by a little quicker. But I want to thank you all for your discussion. There was some good points brought out today. Thank you.